Well, first of all, thank you so much for having us all here, and thank you so much for coming here as well. I would like to divide my first part into three sections. In the first section, I'll give you some context of the vulnerable countries. The second, there'll be some recommendations. And the third, we'll talk a little bit about the future of the fund as well. Recently, this week actually, there was a V20, CVF V20 communique that came out, and it clearly stated a number which has shocked me. The V20 countries have suffered almost over $500 billion in losses and damage in the last 20 years. There are many countries in the CVF V20 membership that are paying more on debt servicing than they're actually using to find development areas or pay for education or pay for healthcare. That's the kind of scenario we're dealing with when it comes to vulnerable countries. And all the while, let's not forget, while the fiscal space is getting constricted, these countries are facing catastrophe after catastrophe. The increase in frequency of those catastrophes, the increase in the ferocity of the catastrophes has not stopped. Let me give you a very small personal example. I'm from Pakistan, and in 2022, the world changed for us. We're here talking about, this could happen and that could happen, we could go 10 years back. We already went 10, 15 years back. This is a whole new ball game for Pakistan now, moving forward. 30 million people impacted, 8 million people displaced. 30 million means a slightly more population than of Australia. 1/3 of the country underwater. That's almost the size of the United Kingdom. So for us, this is a reality. We are the frontline state facing the catastrophes that, God forbid, we all might have to face. So what do we recommend? Tame the bureaucracy. There needs to be speed and simplicity in this new L&D fund. The processes need to be simple. They need to be moving at a very fast rate, because these countries, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Ghana, Malawi, they can't wait 18 to 36 months for aid to come in. Their lives will change completely. In Pakistan, out of the 8 million people displaced, 1.5 to 2 million people are still displaced. They still don't have jobs. They still don't have houses. So that's the kind of reality we're dealing with. So speed and simplicity needs to be there. The costs of running this fund need to be optimized so that the maximum amount of money can go to these countries. And thirdly, the overlays of conditionality that comes with the World Bank getting involved needs to be there. There needs to be a cut in those conditionalities. We can't have reports after reports being required from these countries that are suffering already. And the last part of what happens in the future is that we shouldn't stop to wait and react to a disaster. Of course, that is important. The L&D fund will help. We need to be a bit more proactive. Trigger financing, anticipatory financing. So if we know that 5 million can work today and we can prevent the losses of $500 million, that $495 million can go somewhere else. And we also need to find a way to scale up this fund. 661 million, when you compare it to what is required of about 300 to 400 billion dollars, is a huge difference. So the fund will need to start thinking about that as well. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, and thank you, Zafar, for the question as well. In December 2023, I took a very audacious step and decided to run for elections in Islamabad, the capital city of Pakistan. And Zafar, the reason why I did this was exactly the reason you pointed out. Because I looked at my city and I said, this city is not even run by its own people. It's run by a bureaucracy that is running an entire city on Twitter. There's no accountability, there's no transparency, there's no fairness. And I also realized after the election that change is hard, especially in some of these countries, and I can only speak for Pakistan here. And it requires consistent incremental steps towards progress and advocating and asking for transparency, asking for accountability, so that, God forbid, if a disaster like the 2022 floods hits again, there's some level of accountability, and not just internally, externally as well, as you rightly pointed out. So it will take time, but I know there are people around in these countries who are fighting for that level of transparency and accountability. I also want to use this opportunity to talk about how the vulnerable countries can start working now. How can the risk mitigation, as you pointed out, Ziva, start happening now? And there are some really cool examples of country-wide platforms that are trying to have economy-wide resilience present in their countries. One of them is the climate prosperity plans. For example, Bangladesh came up with the Climate Prosperity Plan, which basically outlines that what are the steps needed to achieve resilience in Bangladesh. And not just with public sector partners, but with private sector engagement. One of the things that the Bangladesh CPP has been able to do is use the CPP, use the plan, go to the RSF facility, ask for concessional loans, and at the same time use the CPP, go to the private sector, and ask for investments in renewable energy. There is a project in the CPP for Bangladesh worth $1.4 billion for offshore wind farm. And these are the steps that gives you the confidence that, look, yes, you have a battle in the realm of bureaucracy within countries, bureaucracy within international institutions, but there are pathways, actionable implementation pathways that can move us in the right direction. So there is a lot of work to do, but it is possible. The last thing I would want to say is that, and Geneva, you pointed this out as well, this vicious cycle of unsustainable debt is turning out to be a climate debt trap now. Because you already have these countries which are paying like 85% of their tax revenues into debt servicing, adding on to the impacts of climate, and they're in this constant loop now. So the hope is that these L&D, the L&D fund is going to take away some of those pains and give these climate vulnerable nations a chance to move towards prosperity. So I hope I answered your question, Zafar, but I think the battle is in both the realms, as you correctly pointed out. Well, thank you so much for that question, Tiger, and Neha for your question as well. I'll just quickly make a broad, summary of what I'm getting from here and what I have seen as well, and how we can move forward, and I'll try to incorporate within that the answers to your questions. I remember talking to a class when the floods hit, and I literally told them, and it pains me to say this, is like, while we are drowning in acronyms and buzzwords and Kairos sport, my people are actually drowning in water. And we need to go beyond this. So the three things I would say that can take us forward is redefining, designing, and actually delivering. So you redefine the processes that are currently there, so you tame that bureaucracy. You simplify it, you make it fast, you ensure that there's speed, and you make it accessible and manageable. The second part is designing solutions that are customizable, that are local, that are flexible, and making it equitable. And the third is delivering that scale that you were talking about for the fund. 661 million. When you're talking about 200, 300 billion needed, just to give you an example, Hurricane Katrina alone cost $125 billion. And we are talking about 661 million for the entire world. And the vulnerable countries, which constitute 21.5% of the world population, they emit only 4% of GHGs. We're setting 661 million. So I'm completely with you when you say that we need to scale up this fund and we need to do it fast. And we need to deliver these projects in a more efficient and more predictable fashion. Neha, you talked about the private sector, and Geneva, you also spoke about the climate prosperity plans. I think there is a linkage that can be formed between the L&D fund and the climate prosperity plans. I would really encourage you to have a glance at the Sri Lanka Climate Prosperity Plan, at the Bangladesh Climate Prosperity Plan, and the Ghana CPP that we've done. It clearly outlines the needs that are required for a resilient future for those countries. Another avenue that can be joined with this, Ameha, would be the Global Shield platform, because it talks about anticipatory financing, the trigger financing. What that does is it really looks into the gaps that are in these climate vulnerable countries. And it outlines them, and it says, look, we need X amount of financing, we need these stakeholders involved, and this is the timeline. And if we have this ready, we can damage control. And there are organizations, and I can only speak for Pakistan right now because of the capacity I'm sitting there. There are organizations within these countries that can help you with this as well. Like we have the National Disaster Management Authority. They already know right now that in June, July, there will be flash floods. They can't do anything. They already know right now that by the end of this month, and it pains me to say this, that in a city called Rahim Yar Khan, there's going to be a heat wave.
They know it. They can't do it because they're so fiscally stressed. So there are avenues available where we can use them and bring those linkages with the L&D fund and hopefully tackle them. I hope I've given you all enough to think about of how the future could be shaped better for the L&D fund and for these climate vulnerable countries. But let me know if you have any other questions. Thank you.